Lucy Ellen Burrell, and I wanted to thank Sue Smith for inviting me this evening. As of September 10th, 2008, I'll be 163 years old, so you'll see me referring to my notes once in a while. My memory just isn't too good anymore. Tonight I'll be telling you my life story. And Carson City's life story too, a little, as we celebrate our 150th birthday. As you can see, I'm not using today's technology. I'm using photography that was the kind of technology in my day. This is my technology for today. I understand that you have PowerPoint and you have slides and things, and you're just going to have to do it my way. I came to Carson City in 1866, but I'd like to tell you how that all came about. My mother and father were in Maine and they had 8 children. And about 1860, my parents got sick what they call lung fever, which is tuberculosis. And my father, who was a teacher, and my father, who was a teacher and a merchant, passed away first. And then my mother used to call from her bed and tell us how to make dinner. And I was the oldest, and I had 2 younger sisters and a brother. And so I took care of them after my mother had passed away. But before that, Dr. Mighels would come to see us and to check on my parents. And he brought his son, who was 30. His name was Mighels. And he came a few times, and the last time before he left, he said, "When you get older, I'm going to come back and marry you." So meanwhile, my husband, not my husband, but Henry Russ Mighels went, and he was appointed to serve with General Sturgis. Abraham Lincoln appointed him, and so he served his country, and he was wounded during that time, and he couldn't serve any longer. So he decided after he had healed that he was going to go run a newspaper. Actually, he was a very good artist and a very good writer. And so he started with the Marysville Appeal in Marysville, California. And he was searching for a better place, and one day he got a telegraph from a friend, Lance Nightingale in Carson, saying, we need an editor up here. Come right away. So he wrote a letter to me, and he invited me to come out. And this is part of that. There are 2 letters, and I hope you don't mind if I read them. As I said, my memory just isn't too great these days. I'm glad to tell you, frankly, that I love you with all my worthless heart. But let us both make light of that fact. So Nellie, you may laugh at the confessions of a poor old bachelor, and when one of these days you may gladden aboard the fireside of some most fortunate lord of creation, you have my consent to point your finger at me or my picture and say, that old chap was dead in love with me once. Later on, he wrote me another letter once he got to Carson City, dated May 28, 1865. Dear Nellie, you will see by the date of this that I am already in my new home in Silverland. My last letter to you was written on the day after I left San Francisco to come here. The last of my tedious journey was 24 hours of which I passed on the outside of a stagecoach. This place is the state capital. The governor and officers live here. I stay with the state controller. He was one of my earliest California friends. His name is Nightingale, and is one of the pioneers of the state. I lend him character by sleeping with him. I wasn't sure how to take that one. The name of my paper is the Carson Daily Appeal. It was named after the Marysville Appeal, a paper I started in 1860 and left just before going home this year. I seem destined to the identification with the state. Perhaps I am helping the Star of Empire in its westward course. The place is situated just at the foot of the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada. The mountains are wonderfully rich in silver and copper. Gold is not found in rich abundance. The silver diggings are about Virginia City, the principal place of business in the state 15 miles hence. How would you like to make Carson a temporary dwelling place? I wish you were here, Nellie. I would feel contented if you were here, as it is I am all the time longing to be back in Maine. God bless you, darling. Remember me kindly to your brothers and Emma and Hattie. Yours affectionately, Harry R. Mighels. Well, it was hard for me to make a decision because I was taking care of my 2 younger sisters and brother, and there was no mother. So when he made that announcement to me to come out and live with him, it wasn't just me he was asking. He was asking the whole family. So it took me about a year to figure out how we could work this. So On November 26, 1865, I told him that I would be his. Henry was unable to come and bring me from Maine, and I had been caring for my two younger sisters since the death of my parents. Henry wanted to make a home for them too. On July 1866, I began my trip west. Henry couldn't leave the appeal to come and get me, and he didn't want me traveling all the way out west by myself. So State Senator Rhodes was out in the east doing business, so I traveled back with him, and Henry had sent the money for me to come to. So his name was State Treasurer Evan Rhodes. I traveled from New York to Panama, across the isthmus on a narrow gauge railroad, and to San Francisco by another steamer. Henry met me there, and we went by boat to Sacramento, where we were married. This is me. That's a little bit dark, but that's me. This is Henry Rush Mighels. This is an announcement he put in the paper after we were married. And at the bottom it says, "Quite worthy of her trust is he whose hand shall shape her future life." And that's what he did. This is a picture of Carson City before they built the state capitol. There was nothing there. When I came, it was just like, there was no civilization. This was a brewery. The brewery was, but it did have a brewery though, of course. And what he didn't tell me when I came here was that I would be his co-editor, which means I would be setting all of the little tiny type and the printer's trying on little tiny pieces, all the letters, one at a time, every day. That was my job. And if I made a mistake, that wasn't acceptable. This was the press, and it was a hard press to run, but I had enough strength to roll it when a man couldn't do it. I'd like to tell you, in 1922, there was a young gentleman by the name of Jack Mighels who did an essay for the Women's Federation Club, and he interviewed me. I was about 75 at the time, and if you don't mind, I would like to read that to you. Let me know if you can't hear me, and I'll come back a little bit further.
I think that's a good idea for me.
Okay. My Western trip was very interesting. I started from a small town in Maine in the year 1866 and came to San Francisco by way of Panama. The hurry and bustle of the West was entirely different from the quiet, easy life in Maine. You're not kidding. The trip from San Francisco to Sacramento was made by boat, and from there to Placerville by small stagecoach. From Placerville over the mountains to Carson was the most interesting part of the journey, for we traveled all the way in a large six-horse coach called a Concord coach. Of course, that's the one that Hank was driving. These coaches made exactly 10 miles an hour. And every 10 miles there was a little station where they would stop and rest. I came over the mountains with Hank Monk, one of the most famous stage drivers of the early West. We became quite good friends during the trip because I wanted to ride on top of the coach, which in those days was something unusual for a woman to attempt. I might bump up against him, and that wasn't a good thing. When the big top-heavy coaches rounded the turns, a woman might become frightened and grab the driver's arm, but my husband promised that I would not get frightened or act in any such foolish manner. And so I was permitted to ride in the driver's seat with Hank Monk. We later became very good friends. My first sight of Carson made me think of a little toy village with its tiny one-story houses and a few trees. Looking down, it appeared to me like a doll town, and I wondered at the time why the houses were built so small and squat. But afterwards I learned that the houses made only one story high on account of strong winds that were very frequent. They called them Marshal Zephyrs. On arriving in Carson, I was surprised to see cattle, horses, and pigs wandering around about the streets. See, there's just nothing there. There were no guidelines. We'd just been made to stay. Nobody seemed to care where the cattle pastured, nor to fear anyone would steal them. Down each street ran a small strip of irrigation for water for irrigation uses, and in the streams of the pigs followed it out. It was really a comical sight. Though Carson was not a very large town, it was surprisingly busy and wide awake due to the amount of freighting that went on. All of this freighting was done with 14 and 16 mule teams, and the lead were usually 2 horses, one of which was called a jerk-line leader. The driver rode one of the mules and guided the whole team with this one line attached to the lead horse. Every team had a set of bells, and the musical jingling made a lovely sound at night as the teams came into Carson. So instead of hearing crickets, they heard the bells. When I first arrived, I was a little afraid of the Indians, although they were not hostile. Every once in a while, when working around the house, I would notice a shadow walk across the room and would look up to see an Indian standing in the doorway. Sometimes they would stand there for 15 minutes or more, although they seldom came inside. But one day, an old squaw came into the kitchen. She came right up to me and said, "We want biscuit." "I haven't any biscuit," I replied. "You want biscuit," she insisted. "I haven't any biscuit," I repeated rather sharply. "You lie," she said, and stalked out, slamming the door. The Indians were really comical in their dress. The squaws wore shawls and 2 dress skirts, one over the other. The Indian men dressed the same as the white men of the town, except that they doubled the lower part of their costumes, like the squaw, and instead of a pair of trousers, each Indian wore a second pair on top of the first. The cornerstone of the Mint had just been laid 1 year before when I came west, although the building had not yet been finished. And when I went to see it, we had to hunt around in the sagebrush because it was so far out of town. The center of town at that time was around the Ormsby House, which is also known as the Park Hotel. At that time, no one thought the town would ever extend up as far as the Mint. When we built our house, everyone thought we were so far out of town. Their house is the portrays, Spear and Elizabeth, which is right in the middle of town. As I told you, when I first came to Carson City, one of my jobs as editor was to set type for the press. And that was very difficult. He also taught me how to do reporting, which I had never done. When my parents died and I was 16, I was headed toward Vassar. I shouldn't boast about myself, but I was a very intelligent girl, a woman. And so he decided that I would learn how to report by going to church and recording the sermons. I couldn't agree. Well, it turns out that the parishioners and the minister loved it. If you'll just bear with me, I have one of my sermons. Of course, I couldn't do much elaborating. It was just a reporter and just the facts, man, but this is how it came out. The Christian government has showered blessings upon us. We must give an account of our performances. There is no substitute in this wide world for Christian life and work and hope. As we do our work, let us remember that our work will be a lie if it is not done in love and with forbearance. I also was the first woman to report a legislature in 1877 and 1879. We couldn't afford a reporter, so I did it myself. At about 1877, Henry was Mighels started to not feel well. And when he was wounded at the Battle of Antietam, those wounds had become infected again, and he developed cancer. So for the next few years, we moved the printing press, and I would set the type at home, and I would write for him. And it was difficult working with him in those days because he wasn't feeling well. But he would never complain. He was just difficult to deal with. During that time, women in the 1870s didn't have any rights. If he were to die and I didn't have complete ownership of the newspaper, I wouldn't have anything. And at this point in my life, we had 5 children. We had 4 boys and a girl. I was pregnant 6 months along when he passed away in 1879, and I had to run the paper, take care of all of my children. And at that point, both of my sisters were living with us, so they were both very helpful. In about 1877, he decided to write a book to pay off the paper. And so he wrote a book called Sagebrush Leaves, and the money from that is what paid off the paper, and I was then the owner when he passed away. And I know you all can't see this, and I don't want to pass it around, it's very fragile. But this is a picture of Henry Russ Mighels and his book, Sagebrush Leaves, and they're all accounts of how I went to the hospital and what I went through in San Francisco. It talks about Lake Bigler and wonderful stories. As part of my reward for working at the legislature in 1879, they awarded me $100 in gold for my fine work. They said that I was esteemed and cultured lady, and they appreciated all the work I had done and proved equal to the arduous duties. I had contributed greatly to making the Appeal a first-class newspaper. When baby Nellie was born 3 months after Henry passed away, she lived for 3 weeks and she passed away too. They said it had something to do with my husband's illness. So I had to hire an editor for the paper, and I hired Mr. Fulton for a few months to help. And then later on, But during that time, when I was owner, my name was owner, and I ran my husband's name as editor. This is Sam. He's handsome, isn't he? He was there for about a year, and he asked me to marry him. The customary time for a person in mourning is 2 years, and I wanted to wait that 2 years, and I wasn't. He said if I didn't marry him, he had a job offer in Oregon, he would leave. So we went ahead and got married. At that time, he said I didn't have to work, although I did intermittent reporting. This is me when I was younger. I was 35 when my first husband passed away. Sam was 30. And this is me when in later years. This is our house. This house still exists as you go out towards Reno, and they have that Y, and there's a trailer park out there. But this middle house is still there. This was the Holstein Ranch, and this is our new family. We now have a combined family of 5 kids, and I have 2 more daughters. Lucy, who was named after my mother, and we had Ethel. So I stayed home to take care of them, and it was a wonderful time. Sam was a wonderful writer. He knew Mark Twain and Bret Harte. Although I heard secondhand that Mark Twain was a really poor beau. He was lazy and he was very tight as a man. My husband, Sam Davis, was reporting for a local paper, and so they needed someone else to report at the fight. This was one of the biggest fights in the country. And in Carson City, where the sheriff's office is now, that's where the racetrack was, and they set up an arena for the Robert Simmons fight. So this is my husband's report. And the artwork, I'm not sure who did, but I've never been able to get a copy from the Chicago paper that reported this. Now, Corbett and Fitzsimmons, my father-in-law was minister of the Episcopal Church. His name was Reverend Davis. And he and my daughter Lucy used to go out and sing, and he would preach to the prisoners. And right before this fight, Corbett came out and he sat with us. He was a very nice man. He was kind of red-headed and had freckles and very pleasant man. So he had joined us for that service. Anyway, they had the fight in Carson City, and Fitzsimmons won. And I have honestly seen my children my boys put on a better fight than these 2 did. But anyway, the other part that was difficult for me was they had a separate entrance for women and a separate entrance for men. Women just didn't go and do those kinds of things. And the kind of women that did go, there were some ladies from the red light district that attended, and there was, I think Fitzsimmons' wife was there, and I was there with my husband, so it was appropriate. But when I reported on the article, I didn't use my name Davis. I used my maiden name, so my friends wouldn't get upset. Later on, I became involved in the Leisure Hour Club, which still exists today. And I was the mother of the Leisure Hour Clubhouse. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Presbyterian Church in Carson. Right behind there is a place called Leisure Hour Hall, and that's where we met. And we sold bonds to get enough money to build that. And in the 1960s, about 1965, they sold it and decided they would rather have their meetings at the Nugget, but it still goes on. In those days, we met every week, and we studied German books, we read novels, we studied countries around the world. But today, they only meet once a month. It's because you have these things called televisions, and you have computers, and they make the relationship with each other now, and people don't go out and make friends or have groups together. That's really a shame. We should go back to the old ways. I was first president of the Women's Federation Club, and when I told you I read you a story about me in the old days, in 1922, the Women's Federation Club was responsible for sponsoring a series of lectures, a series of essays done by the high school students on an old settler or your favorite older person, and that's how this story got to be written. And there are many others like this, thanks to the Women's Federation Club. They decided that if they had a group of clubs, different organizations together, and formed a federation for women, that they would have more power. And that was the whole purpose of the organization. Well, the Leisure Hour Club was mainly run by men, and so they had a lot of trouble with that idea. And so they finally got down to the point where They would let us in the Women's Federation Club, the Leisure Hour Club, I mean, but the men would have no vote, only the women. So that worked out okay. I was also with the California Press Association. I died just short of my 101st birthday. And I want you to know that I lived through 22 presidents, 4 wars, the Mexican War, Civil War, World War I, World War II. I lived to see the advent of electric light, the Ford car, the airplane, television, and I lived to see medical miracles such as the development of pasteurization, insulin, and penicillin. I had a secret to long life, and that is always to have an interest of what is going on. And you can see there were many things that interest me over the course of 100 years. When I lose interest, I hope to die. But I'm still here, so I guess I'm still interested. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
Questions, is Nellie first, or Sue, or both?
You can either one. You can ask either one.
Did you put a paper out once a week, once a month, because it was so long and so hard to do?
It was probably, it ranged, because as Sue Ballew, I do past pages for the appeal, and I go back to those, I've been going back to those early years, and it usually was, in the early days, they were lucky to get two out a week with a territorial enterprise because they couldn't find any paper. And the first paper in Carson was the territorial enterprise, and then it started out in Genoa, and then it came to Carson, and then I went to Virginia City. The Nevada Appeal, the Daily Morning Appeal, started in 1865, and it was 5 days a week. But when I do past pages, sometimes I have because I try to match the days to the days of the week, and I'll come up with 5 days, and then it'll skip 2 days, sometimes it'll skip 3 days. There's a special event, but yeah, it was pretty much 5 days. They were very dedicated. I mean, and the other part of it is sometimes they didn't have any news, so they made stuff up. That's what makes it so interesting. Or very creative writing, because back then you could do what you wanted to. You didn't have to follow the journalistic creed or whatever.
As Nellie, what happened to your sisters and your children? Where did they go?
Bessie died during the influenza. Philip killed himself in a shooting accident. One of the other son ran the paper after we retired. In fact, both boys did. And they had another son, Harry Mighels. He was around here for a long time. And he died probably, maybe it was 10 years ago, because I just did past pages and I ran across that. But there are and then Sylvia Kroll. See, Lucy Kroll, they have 2 daughters, Lucy Kroll and Ethel. And Lucy Kroll worked for the court system for many years. She worked there 40 years, and then when she left, she didn't have any retirement. But before she left, she made sure that state workers had retirement. So she was a real winner, as far as I'm concerned. Ethel moved to Las Vegas. Lucy had two children, Rhoda Kroll, who was from this area, and I think there might be some children, but I'm not sure. And Sylvia didn't have any children. She passed away maybe 12 years ago or 13 years ago. And you asked me one other thing, and I can't remember.
Well, I asked you what happened to your sisters and sisters you had.
My sisters, one went to work at the Mint, and another was a counselor at the children's home. And they later got married, and they moved to California. But I don't know what I would have done with that. They were wonderful support. Do you have any other?
Well, a lot of history of the gold fields out there, with big ridges, and they were more or less defunct about in the 50s, and now they're redoing it and finding more gold.
On the side, I have a little antique shop, and I noticed that we have a rare book supply. And when I go to look them up, the books that cost the most right now are the ones where you find gold and do all the stuff to research for gold. And people come in now and they look for gold pieces and they look for silver. Is it 1,000 an ounce? It was 1,000, maybe it went back down. I think it went down a little bit. That's still a lot better than $5 an ounce.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of a whole other volume.
It is, it really is.
Where did you buy your paper for the newspaper?
In the early days, I don't think I have an answer for that. In the early days, we had Snowshoe Thompson would go over the mountain and bring what he could, some of the papers were printed on brown paper because that's all they had. And when you go back to the microfiche and you try and read that, it just, you wonder what in the heck they did. They probably found a source later, especially with the railroads. I know they found a source, but in the early days, they would even exchange food. If you would bring the newspapers over, they would barter. They would do anything to get their paper over so they could print it. Anyway, I read, my brother and I, my dad passed away 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, and he did a past pages column starting in 1947, and he did it all that time, and when he passed away, we asked the editors if we could do it. And so it's a tribute to our dad, to keep this going on. And then this year we were celebrating 150th birthday, and so the editor asked us to do a story every week on Sunday, and it's been so much fun going back in history. So I hope you all have a chance to read those. Not that it's or anything, but they're a lot of fun. And they're having this Saturday, they're coming out with a tablet with a lot of the stories in it. And I thought maybe I would go back because I have been president of the Historical Society in Carson, and we were given a little box of negatives, and nobody had developed them. And when I digitized them, I found some of Gardnerville. There are 2 Gardnerville street scenes, and there's a church in Gardnerville. So sometime I'd like you to come see those and see if maybe you can identify them. I think they're later than, maybe much later than Nellie, so I didn't bring them tonight. They're probably about 1900. So, are there any other questions? Yes. About 1900, the ladies started to ride bikes, and the big wheel bikes. And so this is a big wheel bicycle outfit. The only thing is I hate bloomers, and so I have a skirt. But this has herringbone bloomers that go with it, and they come down to about here. And the little buttons on here have bicycles on them. And the sleeves are from the style of the bicycle costume, and also the hat with this on the back.
So is the pen from that time period too, or just?
Well, yeah, it belonged to my great-great-grandmother. I can tell you, I could tell you the story, but I've had this for a long time. It just seems to fit this.
Did you have it made?
I bought it from someone who made it, who belonged to a wheelman's club, which is, we run across that in past pages all the time too, what the wheelman clubs were doing. Big wheel bicycles.
Sue, what's the name of your antique shop?
It's White Cat Antiques.
White Cat?
Yeah, when I was working for the state, and I decided, my daughter passed away and my dad passed away right together, and so I decided, if you're going to live your life, do something that you like, just like Nellie Davis, do something that, have things to look forward to. Live your life to the fullest. So I decided, I want to open an antique shop, my mom and I, so that's what we're doing, and we enjoy life, every minute of it. So come and see us sometime.
It's in Carson.
It's on the corner. It's in the Smale House that was built in 1862 before Nevada was a state. Nevada was still a territory. It's on the corner of Curry and Robinson, one block in front of the Nugget. Anyway, if you don't have any other questions,